Hello viewers, I'm SUZA. Today we are in Impact Talk. Today we'd like to talk about climate change, and right now is a phenomena all over the world. As a global citizen, we'd like to know about it. As a global citizen, we'd like to talk about it, discuss about it, and we'd like to solve this problem. It's a very important issue right now, and it's our opportunity to get an important guest, and she's in SOHARA MEHROZE, and she's an expert in climate change, and she worked in Bangladesh a few years ago. So we're gonna talk to her. Hello, hi, how are you?
Hi.
So you can talk about yourself. You working here a few years ago, and you work as a media advocate, as a climate change advocate. So you can talk about yourself.
Yes, thank you for having me here. So my name is SOHARA, and I actually wear different hats. I do journalism. I also I have a job in the development sector, and I lead a few youth organizations. But the main theme for all of these is I try to work to prevent or combat climate change.
So.
If you think from the perspective of our country, Bangladesh, we are one of the most vulnerable nations. Because the majority of the land surface of our country is actually very close to the sea level.
Okay.
And as you know, because of climate change and global warming, sea levels are rising as icebergs are melting in different parts, and because so many people in our country live in the coastal areas, they're very vulnerable to rising sea levels and floods and cyclones and other natural disasters, the frequency and intensity of which are increasing because of climate change.
Okay, it's very important which you're talking about it. There's another issue, it's related also in climate change. It's called the climate refugees. So what about your opinion about the climate refugees? The experts say every year climate refugees are gonna increase. So how do you think so?
Right, so the concept of climate refugees is that because of climate change and because of the impacts such as increasing droughts, increasing floods, etc., a lot of people are being forced to move from the places where they live. For example, if you look at Dhaka, we get hundreds and thousands of people who are coming from the villages, who are coming from other parts of Bangladesh to Dhaka. And why are they migrating? Yes, some of them come because they want better jobs, better livelihoods, but many of them are coming because their livelihoods have been destroyed by climate change. So, for instance, a farmer is no longer being able to produce crops as before because maybe there's increasing droughts now, or because there's increasing floods. So these people now have to look for alternative options of other ways to have an income. And as a result, they're becoming refugees. And they're moving from their lands, and they're coming to places like Dhaka, and they're becoming rickshaw pullers, they're living in the slums. So this is essentially the phenomenon of climate refugees. And we see this happening not only in Bangladesh, we see this happening all over the world.
So what about the process to solve this problem?
So climate change, as you know, is a global problem.
Yes,
it's perhaps the biggest problem we'll face in our lifetime. So the solution also has to be global. So no one country can solve it. No one government can solve it. So as you know, in 2015 in Paris, for the first time, almost every nation in the world agreed to a climate agreement. And the Paris Agreement, as it's known, essentially is a way forward for us to fight climate change, because every country agreed that they'll do their part, they'll do what they can to address climate change in their own nations. So as you asked, what's the solution? The solution is every country doing their part to reduce their carbon emissions, because as you know, carbon emissions lead to global warming.
Yes.
And also countries like Bangladesh, which do not emit as much, but actually they're suffering the impacts of climate change because of other nations, industrialized nations, that put a lot of carbon in the atmosphere. So for countries like Bangladesh, we need a lot of funding, we need a lot of finance to adapt to climate change. And I think
funding is very important here.
Yes, absolutely, because to have any sort of intervention to fight climate change, you need funding. So a lot of projects are being implemented in countries like ours. These projects are funded by donor organizations, by different
But there's a many fund also, there's a many organization also around this project. But before 3 or 4 years ago, basically in surface we never seen this kind of impact. What really they are doing? So how do you think so? Is they really working?
Impact, it's difficult to see in a few years. As you know, climate change is not a problem that was caused in 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
So it's also not realistic to expect the impact in 3 or 4 years. This problem has been caused by decades of exploitation of the nature of the environment. So what has been happening is only recently, in the last few years, countries are becoming aware of this phenomenon. They're doing something. But we need time, and we need a lot more resources than what is being put in right now to fight climate change.
But how Bangladesh can contribute there? Because in the one side, the Bangladesh tried to contribute to contribute in climate change, and in another side, Bangladesh also run there's many projects those against of the climate change. So how do you think? So there's a many projects like Rampal issues and another issues in Moheshkali. So
this is the essential dilemma with development. As you know, a country like Bangladesh, it has to develop, and to develop, you have to produce power. And power comes from, as right now, we are using coal plants. We are using them to produce electricity. And the government's argument essentially is that we need to provide electricity to people because otherwise, 60% of the country is still without even basic power. So if we think about climate change and not give them electricity, that's not fair. However, the argument is if you want development to be sustainable, you actually have to move away gradually from fossil fuels like coal, like oil, and you have to move towards renewable energy. So renewable energy can be many forms. You can already see solar energy is big in Bangladesh. It's spreading really well. There's also other sources like wind power. So we have to also look into those sort of sources. I think it's a very difficult decision for the government, but ultimately for the benefit of the world, they have to move away from fossil fuel-based energies.
You also work in the youth leadership program. You also work in the youth arena. So what we are observing right now in Bangladesh, the youth, those who are just moving here and there, looking for a job, and they think so they have no skill. So how do you think so comparatively world, Bangladeshi youth are going well and they are doing well?
I think well is a very broad term. You have to specify sectors, like which sectors you want to know. I think in general, Bangladeshi youth are taking a lot of initiatives. There are many interesting ventures that are coming out of this country. But obviously there's a long way to go, and our education system is still not strong enough. A lot of the degrees we have are very geared towards a specific skill, which might become obsolete in the future. So I think there is opportunity for us to actually revamp our education completely to make youth more prepared for the future. Because as you know, with the advent of technology and artificial intelligence, a lot of the skills that we have right now might be no longer useful in the future.
The public and private university that can provide anything to solve this problem. Also, they can contribute their students so that they are skillful. If university and public or private university, they have an assumption is that they are not able to provide good research, they are not able to provide many logistics to the student, if it's right or wrong.
I think universities have their limitations as well. We have to acknowledge that. Universities have funding constraints. They have problems with retaining talent. A lot of young talented professors, they don't want to stay here. They want to go abroad. So they operate within those limitations. Having said that, as you probably know from your own experience, a lot of the classes here in Bangladesh universities are very focused on memorization. Kind of you go there, you see a slide, and you just produce the same thing on your exams and you're done. But to actually be innovative, that sort of way will not get you there. The amazing companies that come up, the innovative entrepreneurship ventures that you see in Silicon Valley, for instance, if those students were here, they probably wouldn't have that kind of mindset because we don't nurture that.
Okay. So how do you think so right now the Bangladeshi they're adopting the entrepreneurship term? They're able to adopt in entrepreneurship and they're doing the different types of projects. How do you think so? They're doing well or not?
Well, they definitely have the right intent. They want to do something, which is good. But what we lack as a country is the ecosystem that's needed for an entrepreneurship venture to develop. So even if you have a good idea, you need a lot of support systems there to actually bring that idea into a sustainable, viable enterprise. You need funding. You need an ecosystem where government supports you. You need policies that are supportive of businesses. So all those things, you need good infrastructure. You need a stable political system. And all those things, unless they're there, no matter how many entrepreneurship ventures you have, you will not be able to scale them up, you will not be able to sustain them. So while it's great that in Bangladesh we are seeing all these new startup culture, but in the long run, if you focus, we still have a lot of lackings that we have to address.
You're working on climate change, but whose intention are you working there? Because you had graduated from Yale University, so you're a talented student, so you have many opportunity to do different types of jobs. So why are you choosing this kind of subject, this kind of area?
So my graduation, my degree was in political science and economics,
yes.
and as you know, The climate change science is already there, it's clear. What's lacking is policy that's supportive of fighting climate change. So I always thought, like, what's the biggest issue of our generation? What's the biggest problem our generation, our country is going to face? And believe it or not, actually it was clear that it was climate change, because in the future, everything you can think of right now, businesses, education, production, everything is going to be affected by climate change. So unless I thought our generation, people from my generation, started thinking and working for it, it'll be too late to actually fight it. So I thought the best way to make use of my education and the exposure that I've had in the West was to come back to Bangladesh and try to do something for the people here.
You almost did on climate change, and you working as a media is one kind of media advocacy on climate change. But in Bangladesh, what we are observing in the news portal and in the television, there's right now there is no proper journalist, no one doing the best work on the climate change. So how do you think so actually it's a lacking of knowledge or lacking of anything else? Because in Bangladesh media right now in environment issue is not gonna be a beat what we are talking about. So how do you think so it's a lacking of knowledge or anything else?
I mean, I don't think
why they are not focusing on climate change?
Well, I would differ with you on that. I don't think it's they're not focusing. Actually, nowadays, I think there's a lot more coverage of environment and climate change than there was in the past. If you see, like recently, America pulled out of the Paris Agreement,
yes,
and almost every paper covered that. The Trump pulling out of the Paris
Agreement.
Agreement.
But it's just like an event. When any event arranged, they are covered. But in the every times, there are different types of issues are arising on climate change. But why they are not taking as a beat? Because if you think about the sports beat or entertainment, they're covering every issue. But why not in climate change?
Because primarily, when news offers something or pitches something or covers something, they look at what audience is interested in. And right now, audience appetite maybe for environmental news is not that developed. Because A, they're not that aware of how serious of a threat this is. B, the way climate change is covered or environment is covered is always very depressing. And people don't want to read depressing news all the time. So I think for it to become a beat, journalists have to figure out ways to present the news in a way that it becomes as interesting as, say, a news about a gossip or news about sports. So it's fundamentally, it comes down to journalism and good journalism.
Could you elaborate your experience as a global shaper?
Sure. So just to give a little bit of background.
And how you start.
Right. So a lot of people don't know what Global Shapers is. So it's essentially an initiative of the World Economic Forum. So World Economic Forum, as you know, is one of the most powerful organizations in the
yes,
world. But one thing they lacked was youth representation. So they thought that we should probably create a platform for youth where, other than world leaders, actually young leaders can also voice their opinions. And that's how Global Shapers came into existence. So there are hubs, we call them hubs, like
yes,
networks, in
yes,
almost every city around the world. And the hub in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, I'm currently leading that. So what we do as a part of the organization is we as a group of youth, we design different interventions that will aid our community. So for example, one of our projects focuses on using sports as a tool to increase inclusion, social inclusion of marginalized children. Another project we have called Odammo is about making public places more accessible for people with disability. So for example, we reach out to different public places like showrooms and restaurants, etc. And we ask them, why don't you make a ramp here for people with wheelchair? Or why don't you have parking
yes,
for people with disabilities? So we do projects like that. And one of the new projects that now we are working on is actually anti-harassment campaign, because we saw that, especially after the Bolani rape case, we saw there was a lot of interesting reactions from people in terms of people trying to explain why the rape happened. And a big group of people were actually trying to blame the victims and saying that, because they shouldn't have been at the hotel, they shouldn't have been wearing this, they shouldn't have been there with guys. So our project essentially aims to change this mindset of victim blaming. We don't think there should be a focus on the girl. The focus should only be on the crime, the fact that the crime has been committed and something needs to be done about that. So we deal with social issues of that sort.
This kind of social issues is also interrelated with the psychological phenomena, because their family, the maximum report what they show is that their family and they have no well communication with the family. How we think so? Yes, if communication is going well, this kind of occurrence will not happen. Are you agree with me?
I think there are a lot of factors, and will not happen, it's probably difficult to say. In an ideal world, we would be able to completely factor out all the other things and then focus on one factor. But there's so many things that contribute to something. So essentially what we think is that even if we can contribute a little bit to changing people's mindset, at least make them think that, if you're saying this, why are you saying this? What is the thought process you have in your head that made you think that maybe the girl is to blame or, the family is to blame? So I think small steps can go a long way.
So what about your project planning for this kind of stakeholder?
So we are, it's a very beginning phase because the incident only happened a few months ago and we're still trying to find out the best way to approach. But one thing we have identified is we want to work with the city corporation and the police, and we want to work with buses because what we found out was the city corporation will launch 6 new lines of buses in Dhaka city. And what we want to do is we want to have campaigns or messages on different buses and bus stands which will make people think about these issues. So it's a way of actually making people think through these art or subliminal messaging.
You are representing Bangladesh, so what about your vision for the country, and what about your personal vision?
So far I've been working on climate change, and my focus has been on that. I've been trying to do the best I can from the resources I have and the networks that I have. I think long term I would like to see some change in policy, and if there's a way I can contribute to that. Because I think ultimately it's the government and it's the big actors who can have the biggest impact. And my contribution, I think the best way I can contribute is if I can contribute to the policy aspect of things, of having an institutional structure in the country where people with innovative ideas actually get the support they need to implement projects, be it a project for renewable energy, be it a project for employment generation. So I just want to have the kind of policy and the kind of structure where young people and people with ideas get the support they need to make the country better.
So how do you think how youth can contribute this kind of project, and how youth can contribute in climate change project? How do you think so?
Youth already are contributing in a lot of ways. Actually, I had the fortune of going to the International Climate Conference, and I met many youth from around the world. To give one example, there was a 15-year-old young boy, Native American, who actually sued the American government, filed a case against the American government for ruining their future, because they made an estimate that because of the pollution that's happening right now, because the emission that's happening in the last 10 or 20 years, our generation's future next 40 to 60 years are basically going to be affected. So you can it's an issue of intergenerational equity. So there are a lot of things youth can do. I think the most important thing is to make yourself aware. Because to do something, you first have to know why you're fighting for something, and then you have to find out what are the channels through which you can work. So one of the easiest channels is to join an existing organization. For example, I lead an organization, so if someone wants, they can be a part of that.
But those who are living in the rural area, so how
right, so just one of the ways is to join an organization which is if you have access to one. If you don't have access to one, you can look out into your community, such as your school, such as your college, your local Upazila Porishad, and you can see what sorts of facilities they have. A lot of time there are small funding opportunities available for youth, so you have to apply for them. And again, this all comes down to being aware and being knowledgeable. So you have to have knowledge of what are the opportunities you have access to in your area, and how does your skill set prepare you to make the best use of it. So I think we're living in an amazing time where we have the internet, and there's so much you can search and find out from around the world. Even if you live in a village.
It's time everyone just think about as a global citizen.
Exactly, and I think it doesn't matter, like you said, for about someone living in a village, it doesn't matter if you are, because if you have internet, you can apply to an opportunity anywhere in the world, and no one's going to discriminate against you because of your location. That's how these opportunities are made to be. And I think it's just a matter of will. If you want to do something, you don't have to make it big. You start with something small, and that will gain focus, that will gain attention, and then you'll gain support from different actors. So I think definitely if there's a will, there's a way, and there are many youth organizations already. Even in remote villages, there are organizations. And just to give you one small example, I recently worked with 2 small girls. They came from a very remote village of Bangladesh, but basically what they are doing is now they're going to an international championship, which they found out through their school headmaster. None of them have computers or internet. They just have one computer in their school. But through that one computer, they applied, they recorded a video with their father's cell phone, and they put that video up on YouTube. And on the basis of that, they were selected. So I think the internet's amazing, and you have to, that's a great tool. You have to take advantage of these opportunities.
Those who are working in Bangladesh circumstances, they are facing several types of problems. And almost you working a few years in climate change, you faced several types of problems. So do you have any story you faced problem and you had overcome also the obstacles? Do you have any story about it? You are facing in Bangladesh, nobody just don't give the positive feedback to you.
Usually with any youth initiative, you will face some problems because you don't have any strong backing, you don't have a strong record. So it's difficult to approach someone, especially if it's a big actor, and try to explain to them who you are, what you're trying to do, what your motives are. So even if you have the perfect plan, just because you're a young person or you may not have like 10 years of experience, they look at you with some cynicism and they think like, why would I give money or support to this person? Like, I don't know anything about this person. So I think that's very common.
Do you have any story?
So personally, I think the thing that worked best for us is because we are part of a network.
Yes.
So we always work through that network. So individually, even if I approach someone and I face some issue, I can always refer to someone in my network who knows somebody, and that person can help me out. So I think that's a great way to overcome obstacles. So if I, for example, send out an email to head of an organization, they may just ignore it. But if I can give a reference that I heard from someone who knows me, and then that's much more likely. So I think in my case, a lot of times when I face obstacles like that, I try to find out who in my network might be a good link to reach that person, and that just adds some credibility to your efforts.
It does mean the networking played a positive role in here.
I think absolutely, and I think networking is one of the most misunderstood things. People just look at networking as a way to get jobs. It's so much more than that. It's a way to change your society. If you don't have something, reach out to your network and try to find out who can maybe support a link, a contact to get somewhere. Like, for example, if I, as a journalist, I want to report on an issue and I want to go to a remote area where I don't have any connections, I can just put up a status on Facebook and ask, do any of you know someone in that area who can help me connect
You
with
have
someone?
to figure out the source,
Right.
and then you will go there.
Right. So that's networking as well, but it's for a good cause.
How journalists can contribute to climate change?
I think climate change, because there's so much happening in developing countries, they're facing so many of the negative impacts. At the same time, which gets a lot of focus, but at the same time, a lot of innovative things are also coming up. Because there are so many problems, people are trying to come up with solutions. So I think one of the best things journalists can do is try to focus on those positive stories. Try to see what someone in a village is trying to do to adapt to climate change, and try to highlight that as a success story, and that will give people hope. So I think that's what journalists need to do more.
You told me before in here you're gonna make apps on news, so you can talk about it.
We thought that maybe as a way, there are a lot of aggregator platforms in other countries, but Bangladesh doesn't have one, especially for Bangla news. So we're trying to come up with an aggregator platform for Bangla news, different Bangla news sources, and we try to.
It's based on climate change.
No, it's not. It's just news in general, and we're trying to reach. The idea is to reach as many people around the world, in the country, essentially as possible, and then hopefully, if it works out, we'll scale globally.
Do you want to say something to the audience again?
Hi, thanks for listening to me for all this time, and regardless of what you may have heard about climate change so far, I just want to tell you that don't feel that this is a problem for the government to solve. This is a problem for all of us to do something about, and all of us can do something about it, and this is probably the only time in which we can do something to solve it. So do your bit, even if it means turning off a light, even if it means walking instead of taking a motor vehicle, do that, and then you can play your part in saving the planet. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Sohara, for coming here. Hello, viewers. Basically, I'm not expert on this, but I'm trying to talk about it. I'm trying to figure out the fact. What really you want to do. Basically, what we are talking about is, for me, this is an ABC. But what she talked about it, this is very important for you. Just listen and just stay the tune for us, and stay the tune with us. And maybe another day, you'll get the another interview, and you'll get the another audience, and we'll try to reach you. And what do you have? Thank you. Bye bye.